energy. So things that are normally gone overseas, like liquid crystal displays, are going to come back here. So that's an investment area. Okay, moving on. The levelized cost of energy storage. I think you can see here that even advanced lead acid and certainly lithium ion are becoming competitive with combustion turbines. For example, the chief technology officer of Tesla Motors, the vehicle company, told me that they are developing an advanced lithium-ion utility-scale energy storage system that's going in I think it's the Tehachapi area, or in the Central Valley there. And it's basically using Tesla's battery management system with higher capacity energy storage batteries. So that's what's going on there that's of interest. If you look up here, the two areas that are predicted to be competitive by our technologies in 2020 are lithium-ion and flow batteries. And this is from a symposium that was done here in Mountain View in April. So here's one of the things we're doing at Stanford. This is a typical Redox battery, a Redox flow battery, which has two loops. What's going on at Stanford is a single loop. So it's much more cost effective, and this will eventually replace that technology, which hasn't really gone very far so far. Okay, another one that's kind of interesting is pumped hydro storage. That's still 90+% of the storage is pumped hydro in this country. And basically what you're doing is you're taking like water from a lower reservoir and pumping it up to a higher reservoir when you've got lots of excess energy, and then letting it flow down and generate energy when you need it. And this one in Chile uses some tunnels and pumps seawater up to a reservoir and then back down here. And the key deal is you have to have the demand side close to the supply, close to the generating capability. So let's go on. On the demand side now, probably the two things I think are important are performance disclosure and net zero energy buildings. So let me talk a little bit about that. I don't know if you know this, but across this country now, certainly in California, AB 1103, a state bill, requires now that you provide 12 months of energy bills to a buyer or a leaser, someone's going to lease a property. And that's going to open up the market for energy upgrades. And that's moving across the country, both residential and commercial. At Stanford, we have a solar decathlon entry. It's a modular and scalable design. There's a core in the middle here that can be expanded. It's scalable. That's never been done before. There's a control system that's very advanced. And a lot of these net zero buildings are just basically one-off things. They don't scale. And what's important to get this technology moving, net zero buildings, is scalability. Okay, let's look at transportation. In the engines area, I talked about advanced engine design, compressed natural gas. In batteries, what's going on there is fast charging on the vehicle. Not just cramming more voltage into the vehicle, but actually designing the battery management system so you can do fast charging. I'm working with a venture there. In the chemical area, lithium-ion anodes and cathodes, there's a lot of research going on there. But I think that's going to reach a limit. And ultimately, in the physics area, carbon nanotubes are going to replace chemical energy storage, because they have potentially both energy density and power density. Now, in the control area, there's a lot of activity and research in smart parking, smart navigation, and autonomous vehicles. Some of you may have heard about Google sponsoring driverless vehicles. In this area of charging, electric vehicle support equipment, Tesla's building their own private network. There's interest in public networks, and there's new ventures. I'm working on one there. And then in the workplace, distributed. So instead of having these real expensive charging stations in a workplace, you put what's called smart sockets, and you put them in all the parking places, and you just drive up and plug in. And it's all computer controlled by network and all of that. Okay, that's transportation. Agriculture. A lot of activity and interest, particularly in distributed desalination now. The cost is coming down, so you can, instead of having these big centralized plants like they've got in the Middle East, in some parts of this country. Also, distributed water treatment, energy from converting nitrogen to nitrous oxide, which is burnable, and going from methane to bioplastic. I've got some examples of that. So this is just a diagram. It's not easy to read, but basically this wastewater treatment, and you get both energy out and fertilizer. So let me show you some examples. First of all, the value of it. Per cubic meter, water is by far more valuable than any of these other resources. So at what scales can wastewater be recovered? This gets into the infrastructure, which is what we're talking about here today. So you can scale, you can recover resources at all of these levels. The watershed, the catchment, which is kind of like a city, then clusters, which are clusters of buildings, and then individual buildings. And so this is just another diagram showing an example. Instead of having everything centralized here at the treatment plant, now you can start distributing it out because the technology is allowing you to do that and do recovery at each level. And in some cases capturing energy which can be used to drive those systems. This is another project at Stanford that converts nitrogen to nitrous oxide, which is burnable. Now on the building side, energy efficiency, a lot of interest and a lot of activity in distributed management versus centralized management of lighting and so forth. Transportation, I've got a diagram on inductive charging. There's research going on there and active development. And optimizing the infrastructure. So personal commuter vehicles, 2-passenger vehicles, all the OEMs are working on those. And so that's going to basically double the capacity of some of the HOV lanes. Daytime use, multimodal transportation, there's software that helps you to do that. Combined heat and power, higher efficiency turbines in those systems, and process optimization. So this is what inductive charging looks like. Basically, the vehicle drives along or sits and grabs power that's in the ground. And this coil induces a field into that coil, which charges the battery and drives the motor. The early adopters that I think are going to be the taxi fleets. You go to an airport, you've got taxis sitting there doing nothing. They can charge up. So, and there's others like buses and so on. So, how should the infrastructure upgrades be developed and financed? Well, I think that's something you guys ought to be talking about tonight. And my feeling is, one way to do it is public-private partnerships. Instead of throwing your arms up and saying, we don't have enough money and whatever to do it, and the public money, let's figure out how we can get the two working together. Going back to this diagram, and this thing on the end here where we're using a lot of materials, how can we be what's called responsible design? So, use less of materials, optimize your designs, particularly aircraft wings. For example, in an aircraft wing, 10% of the metal gets used, the rest of it is scrapped. That's very wasteful. Refrigerators. You throw a refrigerator in the dump when the compressor goes out instead of replacing the compressor. Design for upgradability. Things like electronics. Today, electronics, cell phones get tossed. All kinds of electronics get tossed because they're not designed for upgradability. You can also include in that product as a service. So instead of having products, you have services. And I don't know if people know this, but the BMC-3 was actually designed for end-of-life, parts of it being reused. Okay, so in summary, there's lots of activity, particularly on the supply side in shale gas and some of these other things, distributed generation, distributed distribution. On the demand side and efficiency, there's buildings work, transportation, particularly in engines and distributed electrification. and then distributed processes like waste treatment and responsible design. That's what I see. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have time for a couple of quick questions for David.
Sure. Go away. Far away. Yeah.
Which of those are disruptive?
Which of those are disruptive? Well, I would say just starting up here, combined heat and power is going to take, because that both generates heat and it generates power. These turbine systems, I've got one that generates 100 kW of power and a million BTUs of power. And so that can go into a building. There's one in Hitachi Data Systems right now, and several others that are going in that are disruptive. What else? Microgrids are disruptive. Why are they disruptive? Because microgrids, basically you got a choice. You want to, if you've got a remote area, for example, like a resort or whatever, you pay the utilities to run transmission lines in, or you put in your own microgrid and be on your own. Those are your options. So that's disruptive. Yes?